I'm Dr. Nicole LePera, the Holistic Psychologist, founder of SelfHealers Circle, a virtual membership community where individuals join together to take healing into their own hands. New York Times Bestselling author, my new book out, Reparenting the Inner Child.
The 6 archetypes of childhood trauma.
Across different backgrounds and different life experiences, I came to see that present-day struggles really weren't about the present day. Whatever was keeping us stuck, whether it was the anxiety, the conflict, or the self-doubt, these were strategies that were actually formed at a time before we even understood what it meant to feel emotionally safe or to be truly seen. So my childhood was full of a lot of love, and at the same time, it was full of a lot of stress and a lot of tension. My dad worked really hard to financially support my family, myself and my 2 older siblings, and my mom stayed at home to take care of us. Conversations about feelings were very rare. Conflict would erupt and would seemingly vanish into silence, and we would go on as if nothing happened. What sticks out most about my childhood is how little I can remember. Most of my childhood is really a big blank. What I can recall is laying up awake at night, always worried that someone was going to break in, or always worried that my parents weren't going to wake up the next morning. My body was always alert, always bracing, always scanning for danger. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was living in survival mode. The anxiety, the dissociation, and eventually the physical symptoms were the result of a nervous system that was formed at a time where emotional safety was inconsistent. I saw the same pattern when I opened up my private practice so many years later in so many of my clients. And I really came to understand how trauma isn't just something big and dramatic that happens. It can be small, subtle moments of a lack of emotional regulation, attunement, and repair. Those moments can have such big consequences on us. And this understanding really helped me to see many of the symptoms that we are understanding as dysfunction actually aren't dysfunction at all. They were formed at a time where they were our best strategy to cope with the environment and the relationships around us. I think for a really long time, the self-help conversation, what I learned in school, what I was applying to my own life, was missing the foundational role that our body and our nervous system plays in creating our experiences, from moments where we feel safe to moments where we feel on edge and reactive. When most of us hear the word trauma, we think of big catastrophic events, whether it's abuse, natural disaster, car accidents. But what I've come to learn is that trauma is not necessarily about what happened. It's really about the support that we have to process our experiences or to process what happens. So trauma really can result from daily experiences. So for example, something that some of us might have experienced in childhood is having a family that's going through a divorce. So one child, for instance, might have had a parent show up during a divorce and tell them that, I understand what's happening. I'm here with you. This isn't your fault. And allow that child to cry, to experience their distress, their grief, their upset. That's going to be a drastically different experience, of course, than a child, for instance, who, same divorce, maybe didn't have a present parent around or didn't have someone to be there with them through their upset, leaving them to process their grief completely alone. Same experience, completely different outcomes. And I think more commonly, you could have a child who comes home from school, maybe shares an experience of feeling left out or bullied, and very distractedly, the parent might be scrolling on their phone, telling them just to get over it. The message then that leaves the child is that they are alone in their emotions. The more frequently that type of experience happens, a child can turn into someone who ends up being hyper-independent because they have learned that in moments of need, in showing vulnerability, they have come to expect that, similar to their parents scrolling on their phone, no one will be present to them. For a while, trauma has also been believed to be an individual experience. The person who has the traumatic experience has then the impact. What we now know from epigenetics is that impact can travel across generations. Ancestors who have lived traumatic experiences with food scarcity or abuse or war-type trauma can actually pass on changes wired into our biology or how our genes can express themselves, impacting future generations, ourselves included. And with that, then, we have really come to understand the pervasive impact of these traumatic events, again, whether within ourselves or passed on from our lineages, which can include mental and emotional issues and including incredible physical issues as well. When people wonder, if everyone out there is having a traumatic experience or has been traumatized, I think trauma is very pervasive. I think very few of us were raised with the emotional attunement that we needed. We might have had physically present parents, have had our physical needs met. Maybe we didn't have neglect or abuse in the traditional sense, but what we mostly lacked, the large majority of us, is the attunement that our nervous system needed to be able to cope with big events and even small daily events, stressful events, just developmental events. So I think, quite pervasively, trauma is something that unifies us in the human experience. Though thankfully we know from neuroplasticity that even the wiring, the survival habits and patterns that many of us have adapted based on traumatic events can be rewired, can be changed throughout the entirety of our life experience. If you have childhood trauma, if you find yourself repeating habits and patterns that don't serve you, if you find yourself feeling emotionally out of control in a moment where you can't show up the way you want to, and if you feel yourself acting out of character or really don't know who you are in life, understanding the impact of our past is incredibly important because for the large majority of us, we're still repeating the habits and patterns that once kept us safe. We're doing so and we're calling it personality. We're believing it's just who we are because we haven't been able to create space from who we've had to become to survive those earliest environments of inconsistency or neglect. And without having awareness of the impact that our past is having, we really limit ourselves to be able to make new choices to create a future that's more aligned with who we want to be. Unresolved childhood trauma shows up in many of the habits and patterns that we continue to repeat day in and day out. In childhood, we will seek safety regardless of what is present or not. We will modify ourselves and we then rely on those habits even though the context has changed, believing that that is the only way to create safety and security. So a couple examples, if in childhood, shutting down during conflict was the thing that kept us safe, we could become an adult who, even in a conversation with someone who wants to understand us or seek resolution, we continue to rely on that shutdown pattern, closing ourselves off from those moments of understanding. Or another really common one, if in childhood appeasing others maintained connections, then we become an adult who kind of pushes our own needs aside, says yes when we mean no, and quietly then ends up gathering resentment because the people that we want to see and hear us, we're not actually showing up for authentically. So many of us have in different areas of our life, especially relationally, the way that we've learned to create safety, which again usually involves modifying ourselves in some way, that our nervous system hasn't necessarily updated, understanding that contexts have changed. We might be around safe, supportive people, and we can show up differently, but we don't believe that yet to be true because we are still reacting to a past that's no longer present. So really common, habits and patterns that many of us develop are one of dissociation or of disconnecting. If in childhood our emotions, if there was no space for our emotions, if we maybe shared with the parent how upset we were and we were immediately shut down or shamed for our feelings, the safest thing to do is stop sharing, is to disconnect. That's what dissociation is disconnecting from the physical body or the emotional body. And then what once protected us in childhood ends up putting a barrier or a wall between us and other people. We end up being the person in a relationship who's having a lot of big feelings. We might need the support, but we might have loving partners on the other side of us telling us that, I don't know how you're thinking or what you're feeling because you don't tell me. We've created a distance out of protection that is now sabotaging our intimacy. Other common ones is we can become over-functioning. If in childhood we had to either kind of physically support the household or emotionally manage the people around us, we end up continuing to be hypervigilant to other people. We continue to please or appease, putting our own needs to the side. And we continue to show up then in ways where sometimes we even feel anxious when someone else is having an emotion, like we continue to have to manage someone else's feelings. Again, because in childhood, managing someone else's feelings is what avoided the explosion or avoided the shame. So we continue to operate in that way, and we end up exhausting ourselves, burning ourselves out, or becoming resentful of other people because within our relationships, we don't leave any space for ourselves. So there are 6 really common archetypes of childhood trauma. The first is having a parent who denies your reality. This is growing up in a home where there wasn't space for you to share your perspectives or your emotions. And common example is, say, for instance, you shared with your parent that they might have made a joke that made you uncomfortable, or maybe one of your siblings said something that upset you. And you go to your parent with your upset, and you're told to stop overreacting, or maybe you're told that you're being too sensitive. More moments of that, kind of denial of what your experience is leads to an understanding that my emotions aren't valid and that my internal world can't be trusted. So in adulthood, this can translate to second-guessing your instincts, tolerating behavior that doesn't sit right, not speaking up in moments where you do need to speak up. So healing in this moment looks like reconnecting with your instincts and learning to stand up for yourself even when it's difficult to do that. Another common archetype is having a parent who doesn't see or hear you. This might look like having physically present parents, but emotionally they are absent or they feel like they're a million miles away. So a little kid might come home really excitedly, showing their parent their new drawing, and the parent might just kind of say, "Oh yeah, that's nice," without even looking up for whatever it is that they're doing. More moments of doing that, right, result and translate to the feeling that we're not actually there. We're invisible. What we have to say or do doesn't matter. And then in adulthood, it translates to those behaviors where we might not speak up in a group. We might not feel like we're being heard when we do speak up. So ultimately, the goal is to reconnect and to see and hear ourselves first, to learn how to validate our own experience without overly relying on someone else's validation, and to seek relationships where people are actually interested and value our perspective and what it is that we have to say. The third archetype is having a parent who vicariously lives through you or who molds and shapes you. And this is really common in childhood, where there's a lot of pressure to perform or to achieve in some way. A child gets the feeling that love is conditional, is based on them performing, where certain aspects of our behavior are celebrated and other aspects are ignored. In adulthood, this translates to overworking, perfectionism, trying to avoid even the most mild criticism, because we have learned in the deepest sense that our worth depends on how we're performing or what it is that we're doing. So healing for this archetype really looks like learning how to embrace our imperfections, how to show up as a human, and how to disconnect our worth from what it is that we're doing. The fourth archetype is having a parent who doesn't model boundaries. So whether this looks like physical violations, where our physical space, our physical body, or our personal space like diaries are violated, or even more commonly, our emotional space. It looks like having a parent who relies on us, vents to us, shares their problems, looks to us for emotional support. And this gives us then the message that love and connection means us caring for someone else, which then translates into adulthood as overextending ourselves in relationships, and even at times feeling guilty when we have our own wants or our own needs. So healing really is deciding and determining where we need boundaries, and then learning how to set and honor our boundaries, noticing moments where we feel that old sense of over responsibility for someone else, and learning how to create separation where we can very lovingly say, "That's yours and this is mine, and I can still care very deeply about you even though you're over there and I'm separate from you." Another archetype of childhood trauma is having a parent who is overly focused on appearance. And this grows from households where appearance, physical appearance, family appearance mattered more than emotional connection. So whether you had a parent that criticized your weight, your clothing, or the way you presented yourself more consistently, you receive those messages, the more you begin to tie your worth on your appearance. You become an adult who's overly focused on how you look, Sometimes you end up working tirelessly to present yourself in a certain way. You might pursue goals that aren't yours based on appearance purposes. So really the goal is to separate value from how you're looking to someone else so that you can really come to the understanding that your worth is inherent based on who you are and you are lovable with all of your imperfections. The final archetype of childhood trauma is having a parent who can't regulate their emotions. This looks like a really erratic, unpredictable parent, one who might be really calm, grounded, nice one minute, and then explosive, overreactive, or even shut down the next minute. Slam doors, silent treatments teach you that emotions are dangerous, and the only way to keep safe is to be hypervigilant to what's happening around you, always on edge, always on watch, which translates then to hypervigilance in adulthood. It translates to overreactivity or our own inability then to navigate our own emotional reactions. So healing involves understanding when our body is flooded, learning how to pause and to calm our body down so that we can show up more grounded and more intentionally instead of overreacting to emotions around us in a more panicked state. The most common childhood archetypes are having a parent who doesn't see or hear you or who can't regulate their own emotions. I think this is really pervasive, common, widespread, because very few adults have learned the tools themselves to be with their own emotions and or to see or reflect or hold space for another individual's emotions. And these are really habits and patterns that are passed down through generations. So if in their own childhood, our parents, that is, if they didn't learn or have a calm, grounded, regulated emotional presence, then they themselves aren't going to have the tools to be emotionally present, regulated, grounded, to be able to truly see or hear their child, even if they very much want to in their intention. So some really common maladaptive coping skills that developed in childhood that now sabotage our relationships are hyper-independence, where in childhood, if relying on someone came with hurt or with disappointment, the safest thing that we can do is to stop relying on someone else. We learn to deal with our problems alone. We learn to shove down our emotions, and we learn how not to ask for help. We go about life on our own. And of course, then in adulthood, what kept us safe from disappointment in childhood ends up then cutting us off from the connections that we very desperately need. Another really common pattern that sabotages our relationship is by people pleasing. What kept us safe in childhood, deferring to someone else's wants or needs, now ends up disconnecting us from the connections that we want. At one time, learning to say, I don't know, I don't care, whatever it is that you want, it might have been the easiest path to maintain those early connections, but now it just disconnects us from ourselves. We end up not showing up as who we are, not expressing what we need, and over time we end up growing then resentful of the people that we're in relationship with when really, right, we're still operating under that assumption that we can't or it's unsafe to share our perspectives, to share our opinions, or to share our wants and needs with someone else. So coping with childhood trauma is essentially our best strategy that we can use to deal with or to get through the moment. A lot of times it looks like distracting ourselves. It looks like scrolling, staying busy, shutting down, avoiding conflict. It's the quickest, easiest way to decrease the discomfort. But in reality, the habit and pattern is still underlying. So healing involves not just dealing with the moment or getting through to the next moment. It actually involves rewiring the way our nervous system is working so that we can experience the moment in a new way and make a new choice, actually create a new learning in our body around each of the old moments that resulted in an older habit or pattern. So a quick example of the difference between coping and healing is, say, for instance, you're in an argument with your partner. Coping might look like leaving the room, shutting down, or going silent, where healing might look like noticing the panic rising in your chest, your breath quickening. It'll look like slowing down your breathing so that you can help regulate your nervous system just long enough so that you can stay present and teach yourself a new outcome. That conflict doesn't necessarily mean disconnection or rejection. A lot of people begin a healing journey on their own through journaling, through reflection, through, self-care practices, though the reality is most of our wounds were formed in relationships. So to truly heal, we need to be in relationship. Healing happens when we have the presence of safe and security, when we can vulnerably express ourselves, whether it is to, supportive professionals or to loved ones. To create the safe space of presence in our relationships is really what most of us need to heal. So to any parent figure that is watching it, I want to wholeheartedly acknowledge to you the enormity of the task of raising another human being. To be in care of a developing human that is quite literally completely dependent on you is, in my opinion, there's no greater role that we could play here. So after acknowledging that, I want to acknowledge also your humanity, that you too were impacted by the parenting that you have had in your own childhood, which can, for many parents, make it really difficult to show up in the ways that we truly want to or know that we're capable of. So my message to parents is always one of compassion and understanding of how we have become the person that we have become and how our childhood has impacted us, which then unfortunately is a cycle that gets carried on. Though, as with all of my work, my hope is that you hear empowerment and compassion in this understanding so that you too can show up, giving yourself some new tools so that then you could give your children some new tools as well. So any human or parent that sees themselves in these cycles, I hope to arm you with not only, again, graceful, compassionate understanding, but some new tools to begin to break those cycles. And a reminder that in moments of high stress, high need, when a child is in a dysregulated state, those are the moments where we are most likely to, sadly enough, rely on old patterns where we snap or we disconnect or we shut down. So the emphasis for parents or any of us trying to change is to practice that change, practice new choices, giving ourselves support, relying on the support of other adults in our life to help us to regulate outside of those moments. Because in the pressure cooker of a moment where there's a child dysregulated who needs you then to be the person to calm yourself down, right? Sometimes we quite literally can't unless we're practicing outside of those moments or even taking a moment, taking a couple deep breaths before entering the bedroom of a dysregulated child. That will be so much of a better circumstance for both you and your child than just trying to get there so quick. Because when we get there and we're overstressed or overreactive, we might not be showing up the way we want. So even in moments where we have dependence like children, we still have to care for ourselves as an individual and make sure that we're eating well, we're sleeping well, we have outlets for our own stress or support in our own life, whatever it is available, so that we can have the resources to show up as the grounded presence that we want to be giving to our children.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.